Yes, guys, how you doing? Welcome back to Sean Butler TV. I hope you're all happy and healthy, doing the things you love, enjoying what is your Friday. Looking forward to the weekend. A big weekend for Chelsea and Liverpool fans. The Carabao Cup is the first opportunity for either of these teams to get some silverware this season and the first opportunity to qualify for Europe. And this is the topic of today. Welcome to the channel. If you're new here, please hit the like button if you enjoy the video. If you enjoy the content, it helps the channel grow. Hit the subscribe button as well if you'd like to see more, and hit the notification bell if you'd like to see it first. Also, drop a comment. Let me know your thoughts on today's topic. And if you are a Tottenham fan, then you can get over to Spurs Talk Show, where you will see me on my main channel for most of my content. But on Sean Butler TV, we talk a lot about the football finance side of the game, the business of sport, and we talk a lot about kind of broader topics. And this is what we're going to do today. It's an interesting article coming from The Athletic that came out yesterday. And we're going to go through it in kind of piecemeal perspective here and have a look at the consequences. And this is a really interesting title. Can Chelsea actually afford to win the Carabao Cup? And it's a slightly bemusing topic until you get into it. It's worth pointing out straight from the get-go, guys, that Liam Twomey is one of the journalists at The Athletic. But his colleague, David Ornstein, I believe it is, who talks about Tottenham, but I think he also reflects on Chelsea as well. A few weeks ago, or maybe back at the tail end of last year, early in January, he was of the mindset, of the perspective that, or at least his analysis was that Chelsea are under absolutely no concerns regarding FFP with regards to the Premier League. Bearing in mind, and we'll go through this in the video here, that the rules around profit and sustainability and what was used to be called financial fair play are very different for the Premier League than they are for UEFA. They're not very different, but they are meaningfully different in the case of a situation that Chelsea find themselves in. And also, for what it's worth, don't forget that I think at the end of this season, I think in June, there is a meeting scheduled with all 20 of the Premier League clubs to get together. And they, of course, do decide the kind of direction of travel with regards to the rules, whether or not to stick to the current rules, around the Premier League PSR, the profit and sustainability rules, or whether to move and be in line more with the Europa League stuff. Let's get into the conversation here. Sunday will be a big day for Todd Boehly and Clearlake Capital, with Chelsea due to contest their first final since the end of the Roman Abramovich era. Finding a way to upset Liverpool and lift the Carabao Cup will be a significant milestone for what has been a painful and at times chaotic rebuild at Stamford Bridge, and the first tangible return on more than $1 billion committed to transfer fees in the first 2 years of their ownership. And it is important and meaningful to remember that they are in their first 2 years, because there is some forgiveness, there is some leeway that is offered to new owners that bring in new investment into football clubs. We're not going to get into the kind of detail of the specifics of that, but they are in their first 2 years. And listen, if Chelsea were to lift the cup, it would be a good return to lift the trophy within the first 2 years. And obviously for people like Mauricio Pochettino, who never managed to do it at Tottenham and has subsequently been seen after his venture at PSG to not really have kind of kicked on as a manager, then to have done it at Chelsea in his first 2 years would be a meaningful return, and something that I'm sure most Chelsea fans would see as some sort of success after a frustrating season. It would also, however, bring European football back to Stamford Bridge next season in the form of participation in the Conference League playoff round. But it's not clear whether Chelsea are in a position financially to enjoy that reward, and whether or not it's a reward to Chelsea fans. You let me know if you're seeing this, if you're a Chelsea fan, given the fact that the last time you lifted a European trophy, it was the Champions League, and it wasn't that long ago under Thomas Tuchel. You know, where are you going to see qualification into the bottom tier of European football and the kind of qualification round of it as meaningful reward? Certainly, it's worth, if we just jump down through this for a second and look at the actual amount of money that you can make from being in the Champions League, being in the Europa Conference League is not too significant. West Ham United earned only £16 million as winners last season of the Conference League. For context, Chelsea received £82 million for reaching the Champions League round of 16 in 2022-23. Is it worth it? Is the question, and there's more detail which we're going to go back and look at now. For what it's worth, even if you just get into the competition but you get ejected at the group stages, not that I would expect that to happen to Chelsea. However, it did happen to Tottenham, and we only made £8 million that particular season. Let's go back to the kind of start of the article here and sort of get through the context of the conversation. So we're saying that currently, when it comes to the PSR rules, right, because it's all about, this is about the financial side of the game. Currently, the club are only required to comply with the Premier League's profit and sustainability rules, which allow losses of £105 million over a 3-year period. They did so, albeit narrowly, for the monitoring period ending June 30, 2023, and insist they intend to remain on the right side of the rules for 23-24. Remember, Todd Boehly's only been here for 2 years, and there is some leeway, some financial kind of wiggle room for new owners with new investment. And obviously, we're not entirely clear. No one's really been made aware in the kind of the journalistic sense, at least, around how much wiggle room Chelsea were afforded for that first year of that 3-year period, with Abramovich leaving and selling the club and writing off the debt. It's kind of a lot of up in the air stuff that no one's really familiar with. But in any event, Chelsea insist that they're on the right side of the rules for the 2023-24 year. And as of June the 30th of this year, this summer, they will have to supply their accounts, to input their accounts into the Premier League for their auditing, same as every other Premier League football club. And there's lots of financial fair play, FFP specialist experts, journalists that have gone around on the various kind of bigger podcast networks or whatever that are talking about this. It's not just Kieran Maguire that's talking about this, but Swiss Ramble, I think he's also known as Stefan Borson. I put a video out on the Spurs Talk Show that was reflecting this on, I think it was the start of February the 2nd. If you want to check that out, you can watch it. I'll put the link above. But they say that Chelsea, even though that they may maintain the fact that they're absolutely fine just for the Premier League rules, these experts like Swiss Ramble are saying that they don't believe that to be the case. And in actual fact, that they will have to sell many of their assets, especially the ones that count as homegrown, in the very, very early stages of the transfer window. And it's going to be increasingly difficult for them to do that, given the fact that there is the European Championships, the Euro 2024 tournament that takes place at the midway through June, I think begins, but a lot of the players will be going off to the early training camps for that at the start of June. And so when you factor in when the season finishes, I think it's May the 17th, somewhere around there, and the players might need a week or two rest and recuperation period. If Chelsea are in a position, as they deny being in, but that a lot of the financial fair play experts believe, that Chelsea are going to need to sell some of their homegrown talents, which if they do sell, then any money that comes in can act as pure profit on their books immediately to get them out of trouble. Conor Gallagher being one example, Trevor Chalobah being another. I'm sure there's a few others as well. But for the purposes of this conversation, then it's going to be difficult to see a big enough window for them to be able to negotiate getting those deals done if Chelsea are wrong about the accounts, and people like Swiss Ramble and Stefan Borson, I think they might be the same person, are saying that. Kieran Maguire obviously also feels the same, that Chelsea are in potential breach of the Premier League rules, let alone the UEFA rules that they would only have to consider, that don't even affect them if they don't finish or qualify inside of the UEFA qualification spots within the Premier League this particular season. And so winning the Carabao Cup, when they currently sit, where are they, 9th, 10th in the league, that might be their only route. It might not be their only route. As I say, at this particular point in the video, it's worth pointing out that because the financial compensation, the prize money for qualifying and doing well in the Conference League is meaningless, not meaningless, but like very insignificant, then that's a problem. If they were to qualify for the Europa League through their league position, then they may find themselves, this whole thing might be a moot point. Let's carry on with the story. Many outside Chelsea, including respected football journalists, are convinced significant player sales will be required before June the 30th to meet that objective. Returning to UEFA competition next season will only increase the size of the challenge because it subjects the club's accounts to significant new pressures. All participants in the Champions League, Europa League, or Europa Conference League must comply with UEFA's club licensing and financial sustainability regulations, the rules that replace financial fair play in the summer of 2022. These are considerably more restricted than the Premier League's PSR requirements. Clubs are permitted to lose up to 80 million euros or £68.5 million for the 24-25 monitoring period, which encompasses only the previous 2 years, in this case, 22-23 and 23-24, provided they are deemed to be in good health and not subject to existing UEFA sanctions. That means 68.5 million over the previous 2 years, not 105 million over the previous 3 years. So the difference is kind of insignificant in terms of it's 2 years, 68.5 million. If you were figuring out the 3-year period of 105 million, that breaks down to 35 million pound per year or 70 million pound for the two. But the big difference is how clubs can kind of overload in one particular year, utilizing the profit or the loss in various ways of the years that kind of sandwich it, the year before or the year after. If you're only comparing the previous 2 years, then in Chelsea's case, given their overload since Todd Bowley's arrival, which was in the last 2 seasons where he spent £1 billion, then maybe the UEFA rules are going to present more of an issue than what would happen if it was just looking at the Premier League rules, which encompass the year before Todd Bowley's arrival. And as I say at the start of the video, may also encompass the wiggle room that Abramovich's sale and the new investment and the potential writing off of debt may include. So maybe they're not in too much of a distress in the Premier League, as I say, even though people like Stefan Borson, Swiss Ramble, and Kieran Maguire suggest they could be. But certainly within UEFA, it looks like the rules are tightening and it could be a real strangle over Chelsea's capabilities. And that only becomes a problem, though, if they qualify and if they participate in the Europa Conference League. But this is not the only financial ripple effect of returning to UEFA competition. Chelsea's players are likely to have bonuses written into their contracts that are tied to European qualification that will increase the club's overall salary costs. It's worth remembering, guys, that the rules around UEFA's FFP or PSR are not just around losses per year, like we just explained. They also include a structural requirement that reflects on the amount of revenue that a club generates and then how much of that revenue as a percentage can be spent by the club on the combination of 3 factors: the player trading fees, agents' fees, and the salaries of the players. And at the moment, the rules are that a club, whatever the top number, the revenue number of a club generates, that is 100%, whatever that is. In the case of Tottenham Hotspur, for example, I think it's about 500 million last year. Then at the moment, that club or all clubs are allowed to spend a maximum of 90% of those revenues on the combination, the aggregated combo of fees for your transfers, fees for the agents, and the salaries that are included. But next year, that becomes 80%. And the year after, it becomes 70%, where that is the new lowest threshold. And there are a lot of clubs that are big names around Europe that are currently spending far more on just their salaries as a relative ratio to their transfer, or sorry, to the revenue of the football club than and that doesn't even include other things. So there's a lot of clubs that are needing to reduce their salaries, sell players that are on huge salaries, but of course they come with consequences. It's very difficult to sell players on significantly high salaries because who else is going to take those players on and repay those players the same sort of money that they're guaranteed to get at the club under the contract they're under? You know, the players don't have to move. They're entitled to the money that they signed. Again, Tanguy Ndombele is a perfect example. If you're a Tottenham fan, if you're a Manchester United fan, maybe look at someone like Marcus Rashford and wonder if Manchester United don't want Rashford anymore, who's going to take on that salary burden. Anyway, that's for another conversation. But the point is that there's more to this Chelsea conundrum regarding the introduction into UEFA's rules from qualifying for a competition that doesn't really present that much value for them than just the stricter loss criteria over 2 years. They also have to make sure that they are within the kind of salary spend cap and the transfer fee spend cap relative to their revenue. And as I say, by qualifying for the competition, Kieran Maguire points out that players are likely to have bonuses written into their contracts. However, it goes on to say that this likely addition will likely be set off, kind of compensated for by additional incentives in the club's commercial agreements with with the shirt manufacturer, Infinite Athletic, shirt sponsor, Infinite Athletic, and manufacturer Nike. So those things might set themselves up and not be a massive problem. However, the amortized cost of Chelsea's £400 million player signing spend in the summer of 2023 will be an issue. Again, back to the rules I just pointed out. This was the first transfer window that followed UEFA's decision to cap player amortization at a maximum of 5 years, regardless of the length of their contract. Premier League clubs voted to follow suit in December 23, but this rule change only came into force domestically in the most recent January window. Remember, guys, that it was Chelsea's decision to buy Mikhail Mudryk in Todd Bowley's first window on an 8-year contract that alerted the Premier League and UEFA to this loophole in the amortization rules that allowed a club like Chelsea that had a willingness and an ambition to spend an incredible amount of money and tried to get around the bottleneck of that ambition of the PSR rules, of the FFP rules. They signed him on an 8-year contract. In so doing, the Premier League and UEFA voted to change the rules to limit it to 5 years. UEFA put it in place immediately. The Premier League haven't put it in place a little bit later. And this January window is the first window in which the Premier League rules change around that. So players like Moses Caicedo, and I think he's going to go on and say this here, players like Moses Caicedo were players that were signed on an 8-year contract after the UEFA rules changed, but before the Premier League rules changed. And consequently, the ability to amortize Moses Caicedo's transfer fee affects people that are would affect Chelsea significantly more if they're in UEFA, because they can only amortize it over a 5-year period than it does Chelsea outside of UEFA, because they can amortize it in the Premier League rules over 8 years. I think it says it here. Let me have a quick look. I think it does. Let's have a look. See. Here we go. It does say, in the case of Moises Caicedo, he signed an 8-year contract with joining Chelsea after the rules for UEFA, but before the rules for the Premier League. And so it can amortize it as £12.5 million annually for PSR for UEFA, but only for the Premier League, but £20 million per year for UEFA. So there's a £7.5 million difference there. And when you go through the rest of Chelsea's books and you figure out that of the 11 signings that Chelsea made in the summer of 2023, 10 signed contracts longer than 5 years, then when you aggregate all those things together, the difference is essentially a split of about £50 million, I think it is here. It says Chelsea could lose by qualifying for the Europa Conference League and returning to UEFA's financial jurisdiction would lower the maximum amount Chelsea could lose by 36 million, while increasing the amortized cost of their transfer spending in the summer by 21. So they have to amortize. They get £21 million less wiggle room on their amortization, plus with the loss of £36 million because of the 2-year reporting period versus the 3-year period reduces their loss availability to 36.5 million. Basically, they're getting squeezed on both sides. Chelsea could look like they're in a lot of problems. And when you factor in the value of being in the Premier League, as I mentioned at the very start of the video, it's only around £16 million as winners that West Ham received, then is it worth it? Well, and they go into this article now where the story talks about AC Milan that went through a similar thing 4.5 years ago, where they were found to have breached the previous set of FFP rules in 3 separate seasons. They struck a deal with UEFA to serve a 1-year ban from European competition rather than the standard 2-year exclusion. They sat out 1 year of Europa League football, but were back in competition in 2020-21 and qualified for the 21-22 season of the Champions League. It could be in Chelsea's interest to do the same as Milan, Maguire adds. We're moving into the realms of 3D chess here, which some clubs are capable of playing. Listen, for me, guys, in a nutshell, I won't go into any more of the financial sort of nitty-gritty, but in a nutshell, this looks like a situation where Chelsea have got themselves in a pickle. And the Premier League stuff, they obviously think that they're fine with it. But in regards the UEFA stuff, it looks like it's too strict. It's going to be too much of a problem for them to do it. However, how do you square the circle that playing on a Thursday night in the Conference League at the arse end of Slovenia or in random places in the world, no disrespect to Slovenia, is not really a prize anyway? The financial compensation isn't exactly juicy enough to make it's not worth the squeeze. On top of that, if they were to do it, they would naturally probably, according to these kind of insights, probably find themselves guilty of breaking the rules and have to have some sort of consequence for their actions. in the case of Milan, they faced a 2-year exclusion, but by shaking hands on a deal, they just sat out for a year. If Chelsea were just to shake hands on a deal and sit out of a year of a competition they don't really want to be in anyway, that doesn't really make any meaningful difference to their bottom line or their top line, and actually next season they would be better off by not having the distraction of having to travel to, the arse end of Europe to get to play against teams that that aren't really much threat to them, that is not really exciting, no one at Chelsea really cares about given the caliber of their European kind of pedigree and history, then it doesn't really feel like a punishment. They still might get to lift the trophy. This is all presuming they're going to win, of course, on Sunday, but they'll still get to lift the trophy. Pochettino wins his first trophy. Chelsea don't have a complete write-off of a season, and then they get to just say no thanks to Europe, therefore avoiding being part of UEFA's sanctions or your competitions and facing the sanctions of breaches. To me, the whole thing sounds like an absolute injustice. You shouldn't be able to kind of just get out of facing tighter sort of legality breaches just because it doesn't suit you. There's a reason why the rules were in place. If the rules are not ever going to be enforced, then they're not worth having in the first place. I'm not going to get too angry about this because I'm going to lean into Stephen Borson and Kieran Maguire's analysis. I'm going to dismiss Ornstein, even though he's part of the Athletics article kind of fraternity. And he came out and said that Chelsea are under no issues. There's no threat at all to Chelsea's FFP situation for the Premier League. I don't believe that to be the case. We'll find out what happens in early June when they try to sell, if they try to sell Conor Gallagher or someone like Trevor Chalobah in order to get that money early on their books. But in any event, to me, if they can get out of the consequences of qualifying for Europe and facing the punishments of breaches of those rules just by saying, no thanks, I'd rather not have to focus on a competition I don't want to be in, and at the same time stick and stay free of punishment, then again, the rules aren't worth the paper they're written on. I'd love to know your thoughts, guys. Let me know if I'm missing anything from the wider story here. But otherwise, enjoy your weekend. I haven't got a dog in the fight. Chelsea versus Liverpool. Liverpool's injuries, Chelsea's maybe lack of desire to win it. I don't know. How does Pochettino feel about it? Imagine if the rule said if you win it, you have to play in Europe and therefore you have to face the consequences. Then does Todd Bowley and the accountants put a knock on Pochettino's window and say, listen, don't win the game because of the bigger picture? And if so, how's Pochettino and how the Chelsea players going to feel about that? I'm not entirely sure. For what it's worth, guys, the last thing I would show you is I did go and dig up I wasn't entirely sure if a club could turn down the opportunity to compete in UEFA competitions if they qualified for it, because the rules suggest that the FA have to designate which teams have qualified for their own local competitions to make it into the UEFA competitions. If you go all the way back to 10 years ago today, there's a Daily Mail article on the 23rd of February 2013 that Bradford could turn down Europa League if they win the Capital One Cup. This is the only source of information I could find that kind of clearly states that the actual choice of whether or not a team plays in Europe is ultimately down to the club itself. And you know what? It looks like Chelsea could, if they want to, walk away from the Conference League and in so doing, not have to face the consequences of their financial breaches. To me, it's a madness. It's an absolute disgrace. But let me know your thoughts. Like, subscribe, and comment. And as always, bye-bye.